shown in a few minutes. Still processing that. I'm real nervous about screening this film in Chicago. I'm real nervous because Danny Lyon took his photographs and did his interviews in Chicago in 1965. But the one thing that settles me down is the fact that this is Mike's town. And I know we've got some friends here, because they're Mike's friends. So thanks. Thanks for being here. There are a lot of reasons to make films. The best one that I've found is to feel something very emotional, and then try to give that experience to the audience. And it's a tricky thing to do, because it's a gauntlet to make a film. And it feels like you're just carrying this precious thing through this really, really challenging experience in order to get it to a place like this, to have you all feel something that I felt when I was alone in a room trying to write a screenplay. It's what I try to do in each of those films, and it's what I'm trying to do with the Bikeriders. The truth is that this film was inspired by Danny Lyon's photographs and by the voices of the people that he interviewed in the mid-60s. Now I've taken that and I've built a fictional story, a fictional club, arguably a fictional world around that. But I'm trying to do the same thing that Danny did. When I picked up Danny's book for the first time 20 years ago, I just got this feeling. It was a feeling of a subculture. It was a feeling of working class people. It was a feeling of a place. And I've just tried to make a movie that gives you all that feeling. But now you guys get to be the judge of that. I have to say, Mike Shannon just texted me and said the Music Box is his favorite theater in the world. But also, I have to mention Rebecca Lyon, Danny Lyon's daughter, is the projectionist at this theater. She's here tonight. I don't believe she's seen the film yet, so I hope you like it. I'm very proud of this film, and I hope you all enjoy it, because we really, really enjoyed making it. All right, enjoy the show. Yeah. A lot of these people, any of them really, and we found out that Kathy and Benny have a son, and that he's here tonight.
No!
And I didn't know this until a few days ago. I haven't really talked to him, but Danny has spoken to him, and it makes me even more nervous. But I hope you liked the film. We'll talk later. But it's because of this screening that connection happened, so I'm very, very happy about it.
Woo!
Sorry.
So I do want to go back to this moment when you saw the book, and that you had what I was reading, a visceral or immediate reaction to seeing it. And I think in your body of work you have an affinity for telling the stories of outsiders or working class people, and bringing such beautiful humanity and also putting kind of American regional culture on screen. And so I was wondering if you could expand a little bit in terms of talking about what you felt you were responding to, and then also thinking about putting it in the context of your body of work.
Well, other than loving, everything else I've made has just been cut from whole creative cloth. And a lot of my time is spent sitting trying to figure out ways to have men who are not inclined to share their feelings or their emotions express themselves in my films. And when I picked up Danny's book, you look at the photographs and there's an immediate aesthetic reaction. I mean, these people just looked amazing. that time period was amazing, the hair and the clothes and everything, and the bikes. But then you start to read those interviews, and it really was this complete portrait of a subculture. And because I think of Danny's ability to get people talking, you really got kind of this psychoanalysis of how these people operated and why they made some of the decisions and really how they felt. You know, you could make an argument that maybe none of these guys needed to feel like outsiders, but they did. And I respected that. And I really responded to it. It almost felt like between the photographs and the interviews, it was like all the ingredients necessary to portray a subculture. Maybe one of the most complete depictions of a subculture I'd ever encountered.
I mean, I find that so interesting too, because one of the things I love is that it's actually told through the lens of Kathy, and with using Kathy's voiceover narration and the interviews with her. And you know, it's predominantly a male-driven culture, but can you talk about the decision to tell the story through Kathy, predominantly through Kathy's voice, and how you found that voice?
Well, sure. Well, it's partly pragmatic, and Danny talks about this. She was just one of the most interesting ones, you know? Her interviews definitely just jump off the page. There's a lot more to be said. I mean, you can't make a film about motorcycle culture without talking about masculinity. And I think there's a tension in masculinity. There are a lot of things that are toxic about it. Those things have been talked about a lot over the last 5 years. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are a lot of things that are beautiful about masculinity and romantic. And there's a tension between those two things. And I think Kathy, not only is she a narrator and our look into this world, but she's caught in that same tension. She sees how fruitless and stupid this stuff can be at times, but she's also attracted to it. And it seemed like the perfect representation of that tension. And you know, I guess it was around 2003 I first found the book. I started stalking Danny's website, and he had posted some QuickTime audios of the original recordings. And that's when it was like, oh, I get it. Do you guys want to hear one?
Yes!
I was prepared. And Kirk, I hope this is okay. You know, so this is what Kathy sounded like.
Hey Kathy, remember what you were telling me about when you first met the guys?
Yeah,
How you,
I changed. I have.
tell me about that.
And in here, well, last year, what, the beginning?
Yeah,
Last year, my girlfriend called me up and she asked me to come down to Granite Division. She needed some money. And she said it was a bar. And she said that the guys were having a meeting there. Well, I didn't know the guys or anything, so I went there. And I never felt so out of place in all my life. I walked in there and I had white Levi's on. I had a sweater on, you know. And I looked and the first guy I seen was Corky. But earring hanging out of his ear, his belly button showing, you know, like half naked. To me, it was like half naked, you know.
Jodie.
So there's no way you can't hear that and immediately kind of fall in love with just the whole thing. And so
It's a great Chicago accent too.
it is, I promise. We didn't make it up. But yeah, you know, I was captivated with her. And when I spoke to Jodie for the first time, it was over Zoom, and I hadn't seen Killing Eve, so I wasn't really familiar with her work. But you know, my casting director and so many people were like, "You gotta work with Jodie. You gotta work with Jodie."
She's amazing.
She's the best.
Woo! Woo!
But at this point, I had talked to a few other actors, and there was just something about the way she spoke about the Kathy in the script. She spoke about her with affection, and because I loved the Kathy that I wrote, and that was inspired by these words, and Jodie seemed to embrace that. I think it's really easy, especially when you're telling stories about people from a different socioeconomic background or anything else, to maybe judge them or look down on them, and Jodie didn't approach it at all like that, and that really meant a lot to me. So not only did I have the character lens that I wanted to tell the story through, then I had the person help me do it.
Yeah. I mean, and in some ways, I feel like she does kind of represent us as kind of the outsider looking in, too, for the audience. So it works really well on that level. I'm curious, I wanted to talk about kind of, you had the text and then you had the recordings, but the photos are really probably what drove the film. And I wanted to ask you a few questions about taking photos and then translating them into a narrative that's round and whole and full and beautiful. And so one was from the production design standpoint, there were like the shot of like the interior of the bar is from one of the photographs, and the specificity of making sure that you got some of those images in, and you working with your DOP. So I guess the question is working with both the production designer and the DOP to kind of capture specific images, but then also from a writer standpoint, taking these images and writing a narrative around them.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start there. Just to use that picture of Benny leaning over the pool table, it's one of my favorite photos in the book. And I think it's important to note, in the book, Benny's face isn't seen, and he's not interviewed. So all you get are these really kind of iconic images of him, but you never really get to look at him, and you never get to hear his voice, you just get to hear Kathy speaking about him. And so already in the book, there was kind of this mythology behind him. And it allowed me to then take and kind of run with that. But that picture of him on the pool table is an example. And it was funny, Danny visited set when we were shooting that shot. And it's a dolly shot because we wanted to do slow motion. We wanted to push in because it was Kathy's point of view, taking him in for the first time. And so we had a dolly set up, and there was an A position and a B position for the closer. And it was pushed in, which meant it was, up to the middle of his chest. And Danny walked in and he looked at the monitor. He was like, Jeff, a famous photographer once told me, always photograph their hands. I was like, that's good, that's good. And then, we kind of kept talking. And then they reset the dolly and they pulled it back, and it was perfectly framed with his hands, just like the photograph. And Danny leaned over and was like, see, I should get co-directing credit. But, sorry, that's an anecdote more than an answer. But the truth is, I'm just so proud of our team on this one. I work with the same people over and over again. Adam Stone, my cinematographer, has worked on all 6 films. Aaron Bennick has been with me since Midnight Special. Chad Keith worked really with me since Take Shelter, although he didn't do Mud. And hair, makeup, wardrobe, set design, I think a lot of times with period films these days, sometimes people will put an effect on the image to make it feel antique, to make it feel old. We didn't do that. We shot this the same way we shot Mud, Loving, and Take Shelter. It's just the density of all their work. All those layers, they add up to make it look the way that it looks. And I couldn't be more proud of everybody. A lot of credit has to be given to all those departments.
Yeah, well, since you brought up Danny, can you talk a little bit about kind of how you worked with him, besides him being on set on specific days?
Yeah, I think I reached out around 2014. So I had made 3 films at this point. So I wasn't a nobody, but I wasn't particularly a somebody. And I flew out to sit with him. He lives part of the year in New Mexico. And we sat, and I had prepared this really smart conversation about cycles in society and outsider groups, and how this is a perfect example of that cycle, and how I saw it repeated in the 90s in the punk rock scene in Little Rock, and all this stuff. I talked for probably 20 minutes straight. And then he looked up and was like, so you don't want to make a movie about a photographer? And I was like, no, I really want to make a movie about a motorcycle club. But he was incredibly generous. He turned over all of the audio to me. So even the outtakes. So I had just hours and hours, and I just kind of became obsessed listening to these voices. And like Michael Shannon's character, Zip Code, was a real man, and those speeches were taken from his speeches, and that audio sounds exactly like Michael Shannon when he uses the Chicago accent, which he kind of comes out for. But yeah, Danny was very generous to me, and we would have long Zoom conversations because it kind of, the pandemic kicked in, and you know, he was supportive without being prescriptive, which for someone who is coming from the point of view of this is, you know, a big part of his life's work. His career is extensive and prolific, but this is a big part of it. He was really open to me kind of taking the ball and running with it.
And he's seen it, I assume.
Yeah, he came through Austin and I showed it to him, and thank God he liked it.
You know, I guess one other thing I wanted to ask, and if you all could prepare your questions, I think we have mics set up in the aisle, is, you know, the book is really kind of representing a moment in time. I mean, it's a very specific period with the interviews and the photographs, yet the film extends over a period of, you know, starting in the late 50s to the early 70s. And so what was the decision, because we see an era in transition then through the film, what was the decision to expand it to kind of the rise and then what we see as the decline, maybe a decline, and depending on whose perspective it is, but definitely a transition?
Well, the edition of the book that I found was a reissue from 2003, and so it had a second forward by Danny, and he's speaking about the real Johnny from the club, which really doesn't have much association with this Johnny other than the name, but he had gone back and had asked around, like, well, what happened to the club? And he talked about the scene of Johnny walking out and just being shot in a parking lot. And Danny wrote something really beautiful. He was like, you know, that was the end of the club that I rode with in 1965. And later he says that was the end of the golden age of motorcycles. And that just immediately gave me that shape. You know, it was like, okay, well, this is the bigger, I guess you want to call it a plot, but, you know, trajectory of the story. And it feels kind of like, and this is definitely where it started to become fiction. I you know, out of deference to the Outlaws, we didn't want to use their patch. You know, I wasn't telling their story, and I have no idea if the real Johnny was reluctant about the club's growth. Probably not. But I wanted my Johnny to be like that, and then it feels almost like Frankenstein. It feels like you built this thing that you loved, and then it just grows out of your control. That necessitated kind of going from 59 to 73. And in Danny's book, there is a collage from some of the real Johnny's stuff, and he had the TV guide from when he watched Marlon Brando in The Wild One. And it was talked about that he was inspired by that. And then I'd read separately some other place that a guy had been paid $5 to sit outside of Easy Rider. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And if you bookend the film with these two pieces of pop culture, like, how incredible are the 1960s that you can have a film like The Wild One and 10 years later have a film like Easy Rider? It's really insane what transpired over those 10 years to create those two different pieces of art. And because The Wild One opens and it's like Marlon Brando on a fake bike, like in front of rear projection, it feels totally cheesy. And then you have Easy Rider, which doesn't. You know, it felt like, okay, well, this is a decade worth revisiting in terms of the transition that it caused on the American psyche.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of your own work in dialogue with those films as well.
Sure.
We would love to have your questions.
And we had some test screenings, and the studio boss sat me down and was like, Jeff, here's the deal. If you made this movie for $5 million, you can have him not smile. But you made this movie for $30 million, and you need to have Austin Butler smile at the end of this. All of my artistic integrity intact. We went back, we looked at it, and there is something special that happens when Austin smiles. The whole world smiles with him. And right now, the truth is, I just wanted the ending to feel honest, but this same studio exec said, you know, like, their relationship in this film started with him smiling at her, and this kind of closes the loop on that.
Maybe he stays with her, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he gets on a bike the next day and rides off. Certainly possible. But really, if you're saying the end of this film is about nostalgia, it's about feeling this moment is gone. This moment in time that these two people shared that had good things in it and bad things in it, and it's gone forever. That's my definition of nostalgia. So it made sense that it's really not about whether he's happy or not. It's about that they're remembering a shared experience where things were interesting, things were good. That's what that ending means to me. And that's why I could look at that studio guy and be like, okay, we'll do that.
Great. Well, since we're talking about the ending, I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much.